Hello, everyone, and welcome to GCAP. My name is Dean Finnegan, and I'm the art director at Wargaming Sydney. My session today will talk about many aspects in creating a cohesive vision for games and how to communicate it. The intention of this session is to share my thoughts and experiences and hopefully provoke some reflections around your practice too. No matter what level or discipline you will always be concerned with the visual integrity of your project. This is not meant to be the perfect guide, as experiences constantly change over time. It will be a mark in the sand of breaking down focal points and highlight what are the important elements when building a vision. In the Sydney studio, we are co-developing with our UK studio, as well as working towards developing our own IP. As these projects are currently in production, and I'm unable to show specific examples from within the studio, all visual references in this talk are examples from existing games, film, or development practices, but hopefully highlight the point. After all, art direction can be universal in creating believable and authentic worlds for the audience or player. We are all art directors. As a writer uses words to create character and tell stories, an art director uses objects, settings, colour, and many more visual details to tell stories and define character and shape worlds. If we were to invite an audience into our homes, into our spaces, what would all the visual details around us reveal? What visual elements help define our character, what our backstory is, or how we interact with other people? Are we ordered or reserved? Do we live life chaotically? Are we spontaneous or creative? There are so many visual clues in our spaces that reveal so much about who we are. This is art direction. Art direction rarely gets enough credit on films or games productions. If it's done well, it's almost invisible. It feels natural and subconscious. The better it is, the less it's seen. This session invites you to look closely and better understand art direction, how a strong visual design can create a deeper meaning to the game and interactive experience. By exploring visual ideas, we as game developers can connect more deeply with the audience. To give context to this session, I want to show where I've come from and how this has informed my practice and approach. Here's a visual snapshot of some of the companies I've been involved with over the years, both in the UK and Australia. Over the last 25 years, I've had fantastic experiences working within some great studios. Sure enough, it's never often smooth sailing, and there's many decisions being changed or upheld all along the way. I've been lucky enough to work for studios where our projects have always seen the light of day, and I've witnessed the entire development cycle from start to finish many times over. I've also been lucky enough to work on some significant visual and sometimes award-winning projects where strong art direction has played a key part in their success. I've worked on many projects across many different areas such as film, cinematics, interactive media, and of course, game development. High profile projects are fraught with many difficulties, but I've been incredibly excited and inspired by those challenges. It's a huge leap into the unknown, and looking back, many of these projects have had very strong art direction, which have guided the visual quality and coherence of the world. The creative problem solving as part of a great team is an amazing and satisfying process, and for me, this is the very essence of game development. Along the way, there have been many mistakes to learn from, but this has always been overshadowed by the many successes. It's always a joy to witness an audience responding and being immersed into the worlds you create. My journey into art direction has taken a natural approach of learning and observing while developing my career as an artist. I've been involved in many aspects of production and often worn many hats, but all have strengthened my approach to developing good visual design. From props to animation to lighting to cinematography and almost everything in between are all being called on in this journey. This has been complemented with my traditional art college education, where core skills including colour theory, composition, proportions, and many other elements of visual design have been developed. These are the underlying skills in developing a cohesive art direction for a project. But today, the main focus is more high level than the many facets which make up the process. In hindsight, though, art direction is not just for the concern of the art director. Anyone who is contributing to the development, no matter which discipline or experience, should be mindful of how their work will strengthen the vision. Every prop has its context and its place to inform the player or the audience and make the experience more immersive. Never see your work in isolation and always question how it feeds into the design of the world and informs the audience. These are thoughts and discoveries through many years in game development within teams both large and small. They are not meant to represent the only way of doing things, but are intended to look at what the purpose of good art direction is, what it brings to the project, and how it should be communicated and maintained. So what will we cover in today's session? We will look at some good examples to begin with. It's extremely useful as an artist to recognize and analyze good visual design. It's also important for me to look outside the industry and take your inspiration from many sources. We will then take these learnings and help define what actual art direction is and who it's for. I think it's important to define what this is and what it actually means to the project. We will then focus on defining the visual pillars, which for me is the most important aspect and the core foundation. A brief mention on research and the trappings of poorly supported research. Then a small mention about key processes such as colour theory and style. And finally, we will look at communicating and upholding the vision and key takeaways from lots of experience along the way. Audiences get a lot of information about the world and its characters on a subconscious level. Look at this image and see how colour is used to define the relationship of the characters and what they are feeling. Observe how the staging of the scene further enhances the subtext of what is happening between reality and the bureaucratic construct or prison. A neutral zone for both characters and a visual union of the two. Such richness in layers which all enhance the experience. And of course, this is from Blade Runner 2049. Good art direction allows the audience to immerse themselves into a world which is plausible and consistent no matter how fantastical or real the theme is. The key aspect here is plausibility and being immersed in a world that makes visual sense. We've all experienced many times where something just doesn't seem right and entirely breaks your connection to the game or the film. Good art direction provides a context for the story, and it lets the viewer place the story in a certain place and time. It will provide an emotional tone for the experience and, of course, a strong visual aesthetic. It has to look good. This means it will be visually appealing. A key point here then is that I will talk about strong connections that tie all the visual elements together, but ultimately the execution relies on strong visual craft. Colour, composition, lighting, cameras, and the list goes on. Images can be much more powerful than words. They provide information about your world from a high level details down to the micro level. Everything will make sense and have its place in the world. This is a well considered visual direction. If art direction is done properly, it's barely noticed. Art direction helps define visual media, whether it be films, commercials, magazines, or games. It's always a good approach to look outside your industry and observe the success and the failures. Observe how it's applied on a diverse range of projects. In order to talk about art direction and its impact, I'll look at two examples that really stand out as a way of defining the visual experience and what it brings to the project as a whole. Of course, there's many examples that really stand out, and so this is a voyage of discovery that everyone will connect with on their own terms. What I find an important part of the process is to be mindful of what you recognize as good examples, or in fact bad, and analyze why. This particular example is Wes Anderson's The Grand Budapest Hotel. The use of colour in Wes Anderson's films is so critical to the mood, narrative, and depiction of this quirky and fictitious world he creates. Every detail is curated with meticulous effort that give a very staged and deliberate result. Nothing is left to chance. The film has three main time periods, and each one is represented visually with a unique colour palette. I often hear his films described as using a pastel aesthetic, i.e., he uses pastel colours all the time, and this film is no exception, giving it a storybook, sometimes surreal quality. As you can see in this image, he uses soft, gentle, and forgiving colours, never primary. This particular colour scheme used to depict a specific historical context in the life of the hotel, and colours change in line with the time and mood of the narrative. It's an invented and completely stylized world where every object appears to play a significant role in defining that reality. The film is so rich in its layering of detail and the impression that every object has a life of its own. It will often take many viewings to really appreciate the painstaking details, which is easy to do as the films are so visually appealing. I'm often asking questions like, why has that object been placed specifically there? And why has it been given so much significance in the frame? Everything appears to stand and be important just as much as the characters, yet they all work together as a cohesive whole. The use of colour and significance in often mundane details gives his film a comic book feel, and he's able to build a great sense of humour. This often contrasts with the dark and sometimes really sad subject matter and is an extremely engaging and balanced way of storytelling. Secondly, I want to look at The Ghost of Tsushima. For me, this is an absolute stunning example of strong visual art direction. The landscapes are so lush and beautiful and a visual spectacle to be engaged with. Rich and vibrant colours not only look stunning within the world, but allow the player visual landmarks and points of reference. This is very much a world which is alive and makes you want to take in more, giving the player a great sense of curiosity and exploration. A heightened sense of realism, extremely well directed realism. There could be a danger of super dense and noisy visuals and colours colliding into a confusing world, but this is absolutely not the case. There is so much clarity and simplification of the focal points that they stand out and make it easy to take in information. Contrasts of open spaces and tighter areas give a sense of rhythm to the levels, allowing the player to stop and pause at certain moments and engage in others. A musicality to the way you engage with the environment, very much like animation. As a player, I'm often wandering off the beaten track and simply exploring and engaging with the world. Other times, I'm right back in the action, not feeling overwhelmed or confused. Details are subtle and not meant to compete with the feeling of natural beauty. The open spaces still give clues as to where to go and what decisions to make, with hints of interesting places always visible on the horizon. The navigation system of the wind is an integral aspect of the aesthetics of the world, not a jarring afterthought. The environment is almost a heroic character in itself, with the lush foliage is contrasted with village life which doesn't try to compete with its surroundings. Reality is pushed and exaggerated, but still extremely plausible. For me, this is a great example of what good art direction is in games. A great balance of how visuals create a highly engaging world and work seamlessly with the design to engage and inform the player. Having a clear vision that is well articulated and understood is the foundation for achieving alignment. Worlds just don't appear from thin air, so art direction allows the audience to make sense of the world, its history, and its characters. From an audience or player point of view, it allows the audience to easily identify with the world you are creating and be immersed in it. It is also about communicating the vision to the audience in a clear and concise way, without sensory overload or confusion. Art direction will provide lots of details in a clear and deliberate way and cut out visual noise. Everything has its place and is there for a reason. Small pieces of the jigsaw that inform the audience without the need for clumsy exposition. I would say in that sense, it's art direction allows you to be economical. From a development point of view, art direction is about building the framework and communicating that vision to all the team, not just the artist. Communication is key here and is a constant process throughout development. It will inspire the team and align all work into a consistent world. To make a game takes thousands and thousands of decisions along the way. We've all experienced that. Long-term decisions, daily decisions, unexpected decisions, and everything in between. It's about how every system interacts with one another, how nothing lives in a vacuum. All parts of a game are essentially an ecosystem that affect each other. A very complex beast indeed. On a game level, strong visual direction allows the player to visually orient themselves in the world and to some degree inform them to make decisions in a focused experience. Meandering aimlessly around a game is no fun, but there are exceptions. It helps players invest in the world and understand how the world works. Game development has unique considerations in the process as the player participates within the world rather than witness it or be guided by it. Art direction will improve decision making and improve spatial awareness. Without holding their hands, the player needs to be engaged with a high sense of curiosity. Guidance to make informed decisions, not pointing the way. Communicating affordances and making sure that visual language is consistent. As a player, it's important to know what I can interact with and frustrating when expectations are broken. I think we've all witnessed that too. Framing the visual direction with good narrative helps strengthen the reason for the world to exist, the way it should, and make sense. What do we communicate to the player and the layers of detail that can be extracted to inform the player about our world? So art direction is about producing an art bible, right? Art bible, high-level visual design document, visual bible often become the final physical guide of the art vision. It becomes an important document from which everybody will instantly understand how to create a cohesive game and understand how their features build towards that vision. As an artist working on many projects at different levels, it's often been a physical thing that's handed out to every new artist in order to understand what we are making. The reality, though, is often very different. Teams grow, features are complex, new people join, technology changes or is restrictive, and over time the vision will meander and morph into something that can be a totally different path. Will the art bible pull everything back on track? Almost never. The main assumptions have been that the art bible or art direction is really only important for the artist. It is true that the artist will strengthen that vision and be inspired to build on that vision, but the art direction is for everyone. Nothing is done in isolation in games, no matter what discipline. Games development is very much a collaborative experience of multidisciplines working on a complex features. In order to build a consistent vision, then the biggest hurdle is ensuring every team member is working towards that vision and contributing towards the vision. There will be many decisions being made all along the way, many adjustments and corrections that should all be made in strengthening that vision. Alignment to allow the team to make the decisions rather than micromanaging is the important function here. Inform teams that understand and build on that vision. There will be an infinite amount of questions along the way. There always are in game development. But can a single document always provide the answers to these questions? I'll talk about this in my summary, but the general assumption has been create the art Bible and it will guide the way. But that's not always the case, and it's a constantly changing situation. What I'll now focus on, though, are some of the major elements and considerations that, for me, are integral in building that vision. Let's start to look into the journey of developing good visual design. In my experience, building strong visual pillars is key to the whole process. This part of the process will be working extensively with the design as it emerges and having the conversations that shape the world from both a look and a feel point of view. This is the starting off point and allows you to be mindful of the big ideas that serve as the overall vision. Working closely with the design pillars will really start to shape the core visual pillars that will help inform a cohesive world and the reason it exists. There is no magic number for the amount of design pillars, but for me, keeping it around 3 is a good start. It's about defining the core scaffolding from which to construct your world. Breaking down the visual elements, thematic elements, and narrative elements and how they can shape the long-term direction. What do we communicate to the player and the layers of detail that can be extracted to inform the player about our world? Breaking down the design considerations and how you will interpret the world visually. For me, it's not about representing through example visuals, but define more fundamental pointers to the imagining of that world. Go further than the surface of the visuals and define the reason for their existence. What is the world and how has it come to be? What are the connections and the layers that inform that world? For example, in the image above, in this slide, on the surface, it could simply be modern architecture in a natural environment. But the art pillars define much more than the superficial. They become the reason for elements to be a certain way. For example, a rich, organic, thriving natural world as a statement of beauty and free, non-rigid. Balanced against geometric architecture, which represents the imposing of humanity and its attempts to control. The rules and constraints and attempts at changing or modifying that natural world. Vivid colours of greens and reds suggest the beauty of a well-balanced ecosystem, in stark contrast to the subdued, monotone monoliths of architecture. So that's the difference between superficial images and starting to define the core of your art pillars. Looking at another great example of art direction is the game Control. From my interpretation, the visual pillars of Control were all about suppression. The brutalist architecture reflecting a conformist and bureaucratic setting of rules and rigidity. Even the small evidence of nature, for example in this slide, to act as visual contrasts are still suppressed and controlled in the planters. The subdued tones of greys and browns help emphasize the importance of texture and surface detail. With a limited and subdued color palette, a subtle but effective point of difference is in the treatment of surfaces and how light interacts with them. This design, no matter how stark and brutal, is still visually interesting and appealing. Surfaces are broken up with recesses, providing interesting ways in which light creates form through shadows. A claustrophobic feeling of government suppression with architecture that suggests strength, power, and stability, but is unsettling at its core. It relies heavily on the subgenre of science fiction called New Weird, which focuses on a normal world being changed by a foreign object. It presents an environment that is familiar and yet somehow sinister and unsettling. Do you care for the environment or are detached from it? Are you intrigued and curious and keep exploring and investigate? This really provides a balance to the paranormal and supernatural presence in its incarnation in this game. Distorted and unpredictable, simple color themes are a stark contrast to the subdued greys, which come later. The offset of these two ideas perfectly balance and contrast each other as visual opposites. What we are identifying here in the visual pillars are ways of strengthening subtext. By definition, the content of creative work which is not announced explicitly but is implicit or becomes something understood by the observer or player. There are many visual techniques for strengthening subtext, which include metaphor, allegory, and symbolism to name a few, and I'll not go into that detail. These approaches can assign a stronger visual meaning and context within the game that has the possibility of connecting the audience on many levels. A fantastic example of symbolism and strong design of visual motifs is found within Blade Runner, the first Blade Runner. From this slide, this is an example how cultural references and a connected language of metaphor can really serve the audience in connecting. The eyes, being the window of the soul, plays heavily in what it means to be human, right down to the identification using the Voigtkampf test and the analysis of the eyes and their response to human empathetic responses. Eyes are a really strong visual theme in Blade Runner. This theme is further enhanced with the notion of perception, what is real, identity, and memories, all memories observed through the eyes. Even Tyrell, who wears thick glasses, suggests the short-sightedness in his vision as a maker, so both actual and symbolic. His demise is also significant in that his eyes are gouged out by one of his creations, with reference to being made in his own image, so eyes are everywhere. I could go on for hours referencing this visual theme, but what it is intended to highlight is how strong visual design plays an important role. It gives meaning to details no matter how big or small, and provides a consistency that ties the complexity of the world together. It's important to spend time in working out and shaping the more complex visual design ideas. The visual meaning and context will drive the art direction forward with a purpose and integrity. It helps justify the reason for everything to be there and strengthen that vision. It will allow you to be economical and cut out unnecessary noise that doesn't give any clarity to the end result. We only have a short amount of time to engage our audiences. These are all ways of connecting deeper with our audiences. Symbol, metaphor, iconography, and other visual tools are all really useful in shaping this visual language, and it's important that they're defined first. Don't overload with too many complexities. The visual pillars can potentially change as the art direction takes shape and becomes more coherent. But once defined, they provide a fantastic reference point to keep questioning and challenging the work being produced. From experience, the pillars provide the framework from which to plot out the details and the focal points. It provides a solid base to now explore and work out the many facets that combine to make the whole experience. Elements such as colour, emotion, framing, mood, composition, and on it goes, all built on strong pillars. There will be a high degree of gathering research, providing mood boards. An aspect of art direction that has become more prominent in recent times is the use of user experience testing. After all, one of the main reasons in developing great art direction and ultimately a strong, visually pleasing game is so that it resonates with a target audience. This can be where lots of research will help support your assumptions. For a long time, games were built on the assumptions of the development team. The risk was high in not finding out until release whether the project had strong appeal and if the audience was able to have deep connections to it. But this tends not to be the case anymore. UX testing can offer an accurate understanding of target players and their gameplay experience, visual preferences, and alignments. Take advantage of UX lab testing for more accurate response from targeted player profiles. UX testing can identify and help resolve potential problem areas before or during development, leading to a better alignment to your audience. A cautionary note, however, is that I strongly believe that development should be data informed and not led. Use the process to acknowledge the alignment of your audience to areas such as style, character design, color themes, etc. It can be a slow process if you allow the UX to make the decisions on which way forward for all aspects of the visual design. The UX labs we use seek to improve the gameplay experience and can determine and strengthen approaches to art direction. They utilize research methods such as behavioral observation, interviews, questionnaires, and so on. So colour theory is a massive topic unto itself, but really deserves a mention as a major factor in defining the art direction. It can be the difference between immersing your audience in a world, boring them to tears, or giving them headaches and nausea. Rather than go specifically into the theory of colour, I want to highlight a few core functions that colour can provide. At its core, colour can be used to help players identify objects, make and determine spatial relationships. Also, from an interactive point of view, the colour of an item or area communicates whether or not it can be interacted with and how it can be used. Colour can also help determine what's important in the scene: the player, enemies, interactive objects, background elements, and on it goes. Colour can help make this visual hierarchy clear and give focus to what elements are important. It helps the player figure out what to do, where to go, who to attack, what to pick up. Colour is mainly defined by three properties: hue, which refers to what colour you're looking at; value describes whether or not a colour is light or dark; and saturation describes how intense of a colour we're getting. It is the manipulation of these properties that can help define a major aspect of the visual direction. This example from Mirror's Edge is really an excellent example of the use of colour for spatial awareness. Through the use of a restricted primary colour palette, which is contrasted by the predominantly grey architecture, it becomes very apparent to the player of how to navigate through this space. What is important and what objects should I focus on next? Highly saturated values bring a lighter, uplifting mood to these external locations and really inform the player to make those clear, decisive decisions at any moment in time. Colour can also be a powerful tool to establish mood and evoke emotions in the player. It can also create and encourage a heightened sense of drama. Colour can stimulate, excite, create feelings of warmth, coolness, comfort, discomfort, and can also influence physiological and psychological behaviours such as hunger or aggression. Colour plays a significant part in affecting emotions and can have a significant impact on the player experience. If you look at The Last of Us 2, or in fact any of those titles, it's a somber game with dark undertones and it thrives on blues and greens. They are not bright blues and greens, but really understated. This is where hue, saturation, and value really come into play. The colours are muted, understated, and somber, and really enhance that underlying darkness and that sense of discomfort when you're playing the game. In really understanding colour and the colour wheel, you will see how colour schemes have a large impact on the visual design. Again, in this example, you can see a complementary colour scheme, which is defined by the lighting source. The more natural blues from the moonlight are nicely complemented with orange of the artificial lights. This visual colour opposite provide a great spatial awareness of where the player should go and how to navigate through this space. There's even an extra element to that in that the red is a constant theme of exit points or where to head to, and you can see this is perfect example of how all those colours work together to navigate that space. So not only that, complementary colours of blue and orange are a very, very visually appealing combination and occur very commonly in many films and poster designs. You'll notice that a lot of film posters definitely use blue and orange as complementary colours. As a contrast to this, The Matrix is predominantly based around a monochromatic colour theme, and almost every frame is based around the colour green. Green was intended to make the viewer feel uneasy and artificial, as green evokes a sense of digital and generated by computer. So again, very clear use of colour in the visual design. I've often seen games be labelled into very large buckets of either realism or stylized, but there is so much more than these polar opposites. The main consideration here is that style is not separate, but it's closely connected to the narrative and experience we're trying to create. Finding the right style can be instrumental for a coherent connection between the look and the story. It's all part of the same thing. Make gamers curious and want to explore, but give them the space to digest information. When defining the style of the finished product, there are many factors that need to be considered. Most importantly, though, beyond the style of the game, there needs to be plausibility. Your audience has to believe in that world and that it makes sense to them so that they can commit to it and engage with it. Also, when talking about realistic style, there still needs to be a highly considered visual design approach, as the focus is realism, not necessarily accuracy of reality. It is more about feeling and atmosphere. From a creative point of view, the accuracy of real life still needs to be visually considered and directed. After all, real life is often mundane and ordinary until it is art directed. Good direction has to make reality visually appealing, as it's not a given it will be. Often reality can be visually very noisy, so understanding the considerations of what each style brings will help form that vision. When considering style, also think about your target audience. This is an area that can be UX tested early on to see what will resonate with your audience. Style will still consider and be comprised of many aspects of visual design, including colour, proportions, visual density, light, shadow, etc. etc. In summary, consider style as part of the entirety of the work, not as something to attach onto the project and that doesn't feel authentic. I want to give a special mention to a specific process which is providing lots of value currently in development. Storyboards are mainstay in film as many other areas and provide a visual means of planning and preempting problems or strengthening certain ideas. In essence, they're another approach in communicating the vision to the team, and that's why they do get a special mention here. They're an opportunity to explore the vision in a very quick and iterative way. From an art direction point of view, they provide an initial look into certain features or gameplay moments and ensure elements align to that vision. They are also a fantastic way to align the team prior to starting that work, and a great way for all disciplines to visualize the potential end result. Game development is such a complex process that storyboarding from design doc or design brief is a step closer to that realization. It's kind of that in between stage that allows people to sort of visualize. Often words can lead to assumptions or preconceptions, whereas storyboards allows a much closer interpretation of that intended result. They provide a quick and fast iteration cycle and predict possible problems and how it will align to the visual pillars. The key here is to iterate quickly by whatever means works in communicating that idea. Sketching, screen grabs, and draw overs are all part of that language in helping the team visualize complex features. By quickly answering these variations before the work starts, it'll save so much rework in the long run, and we've found this is as we develop certain features. From my experience, the team will have a better understanding of what they are making and striving for, and able to ask those questions before the work starts. It reduces miscommunication and encourages feedback earlier in that development process, and that saves time and again reduces rework. It'll quickly allow the team to explore and question alternative scenarios which can arise as part of gameplay. So if anybody in the team has really fantastic questions that challenge what the storyboards are presenting, it's very easy to go back to storyboards and work that out before the work starts. Be proactive in pushing out the message and checking in. Don't expect just to hand out the art Bible and everybody instantly understands the vision and will be confident in delivering towards it. Look at different ways of communicating the vision, upholding the vision, and strengthening it. Take the time to talk to people, discuss what the focal points are and how they can feed into that vision. Broadcast the art pillars as a way of encouraging questions and feedback. This will all help to strengthen the direction. Provide more than those superficial visuals as art direction. Context, meaning, and subtext can help a team align into the visual direction rather than just saying, I want it to look like this. Art direction is not just for artists, so consider how you broadcast and communicate the vision. The more you can detail what the vision is through specifics, the less open to interpretation it will be. Ask questions, have discussions, and make sure the team is confident in alignment. The more that people are aligned, the discussions become easier and more contributions will follow. Empower the team to be advocates for the direction, so really spend the effort in this space. Art direction, as we mentioned earlier, is a concern for everyone, no matter what level or discipline, so have those conversations with everyone. Communicate as much as possible and support and facilitate. Understand people's experiences and interpretations of the same reference can be different. and think through whether this aligns or detracts from the vision, and communicate early and give feedback often. I really appreciate your time in joining me in this session. This topic is such a massive area with so many facets that simply can't be covered within this time frame. I hope at the very least some things have resonated, no matter what your role in the team is. It's been an interesting way of breaking down a complex process and has been insightful to me in what to consider along the way. My intention was to invite you to look closely and better understand art direction, how a strong visual design can create a deeper meaning to the game and interactive experience. And finally, by exploring strong visual ideas, we as developers can connect more deeply with the audience. This is something I'm very passionate about, and as you can see, these are thoughts and observations, not specific answers. It's always good to take stock and reflect on approaches, and I'm really sure that these will evolve over time. If you want to continue any aspect of this conversation, then please feel free to reach out. Approaches, methodologies, and expectations are forever changing in game development, so I'm really interested in sharing any experiences that you have. You can find me on LinkedIn or you can even email me at work. Thank you for listening.